The path to renewing the Canada-United States-Mexico agreement could be getting bumpier as the negotiation timeline continues to shrink. At the Canadian Crops Convention in Toronto this week, U.S. Ambassador to Canada Pete Hoekstra joined Aaron Gowrlink of the Canadian Grains Council for a fireside chat on the future of the trade deal, known as CUSMA in Canada and USMCA in the United States. He told the convention that President Trump has said, quote, "We will have tariffs," adding that Canada should be working to ensure it lands in what he calls the lowest tariff bucket. While the agreement itself is generally viewed as working well, Hoekstra warns that the clock is ticking on the review process. He noted that there has not been a substantive discussion on the deal since October, even as the July deadline approaches. He told the convention that President Trump has said, quote, "We will have tariffs," adding that Canada should be working to ensure it lands in what he calls the lowest tariff bucket. While the agreement itself is generally
Okay, let's get one thing straight right at the top. Is CUSMA dead today? No. Not formally. Not legally. Not yet. But if you want to know whether the agreement is in real trouble, Donald Trump's own ambassador just told you the answer. Reuters reports that U.S. Ambassador to Canada Pete Hoekstra said Washington is facing headwinds in trade negotiations with Canada, and that there have been no substantive discussions since October as the July 1, 2026 review deadline approaches. That is not routine diplomatic friction. It is a warning signal. And once you understand what CUSMA actually holds together, that warning starts to look a lot more serious. This is the trade framework governing roughly $1.6 trillion in annual commerce across the United States, Canada, and Mexico. It underpins autos, agriculture, energy, metals, logistics, and manufacturing across the continent. AP reports that major industries are already warning that if this framework weakens or collapses, the consequences could be severe. So no, this is not just one more trade spat. This is about whether North America can still function as a coherent industrial system while Trump treats trade agreements like disposable props. And that is the real story here. Because this crisis did not fall from the sky. It was built. Built through tariffs. Built through threats. Built through legal overreach. Built through political arrogance. Built through the steady destruction of trust. Let's go back to the beginning of the fracture. In March 2025, Canada imposed $29.8 billion Canadian dollars in retaliatory tariffs after Trump hit steel and aluminium. Reuters also reported that Canada challenged those U.S. tariffs through the World Trade Organization. That matters because it shows this relationship has been under pressure for more than a year. The current crisis is not sudden. It is cumulative. Then came the rhetoric. In January 2026, Reuters reported Trump said the United States does not need USMCA, calling the agreement effectively irrelevant for America. That is an extraordinary thing for a president to say about the very trade architecture his own administration once rolled as a major achievement. You do not strengthen negotiations by publicly mocking the value of the agreement you are supposed to review in good faith. You sabotage them. Then came the legal humiliation. In February 2026, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down Trump's sweeping global tariffs imposed under emergency powers, ruling that he lacked authority under the 1977 law he used. Reuters described it as a major setback. The ruling weakened one of Trump's biggest tools of pressure. In simple terms, his favorite weapon suddenly looked a lot less frightening. And what did the administration do instead of rebuilding trust? It started looking for new weapons. Reuters reported that after the Supreme Court setback, Trump pivoted to a temporary 10% global tariff under a different law and launched new trade probes under unfair trade and national security tools. That tells you everything about the method here. When one instrument of pressure is taken away, Washington does not ask how to stabilize the relationship. It asks how to rebuild leverage. That is the context behind Hoekstra's admission. Now let's talk about Carney. Because the online version of this story says Carney has walked away from the talks completely. That is too blunt if you mean literally every channel is dead. Reuters reported on February 26 that Canada was still holding private government conversations about the pact and that Canadian Minister Dominic LeBlanc said those talks were not discouraging. Canada also said it could pursue bilateral critical sector deals on steel, aluminium, and autos while the broader trilateral review continues. So no, Canada has not vanished into silence. But here is the more important truth. Carney has clearly started walking away from the old Canadian assumption that economic security means automatic trust in Washington. That is the real shift. And you can see it in how Canada is positioning itself now. Reuters reported in January that Carney wants to lead a new global trading order less reliant on the United States. 2 days ago, Reuters reported that Canada and the Nordic countries agreed to deepen cooperation in military procurement and broader middle power coordination as part of an effort to reduce dependence on Washington. That is not symbolic. That is strategic repositioning. And it gets even more interesting when you compare Canada's posture with Mexico's. Reuters reported that the US and Mexico are beginning bilateral discussions this week as part of the review process. But Reuters also reported that Canada and Mexico both publicly emphasized the importance of preserving the trilateral framework ahead of the talks. So while Washington appears interested in extra bilateral leverage, Ottawa and Mexico City are signaling that the three-country architecture still matters. That matters because divide and pressure only works if your partners lose confidence in each other. So far, Canada and Mexico seem to understand the game. And that is exactly why Trump's strategy is becoming more dangerous. Because once trust erodes, the whole machine starts shaking. Think about autos. Reuters reported in November that major automakers including Ford, Toyota, and Tesla urged Trump to extend the North American trade deal because it is crucial to US auto production. Reuters also reported that Detroit automakers said the agreement accounts for tens of billions of dollars in annual savings. That is not ideology. That is industrial reality. A car built in America may contain parts made in Canada and Mexico. Steel can cross borders multiple times before the final product exists. Energy flows are integrated. Supply chains are integrated. Jobs are integrated. So when Trump talks as if CUSMA is optional, he is not proving strength. He is gambling with the production logic of the continent. And here is what makes the timing even worse. The global backdrop is more unstable now than when these tensions first started. The Iran war has added pressure to shipping, energy, and broader supply chains. Reuters reported this week that Canada contributed 2.36 million barrels to an emergency energy release. Which underscores something important. In a world of unstable sea lanes and geopolitical shocks, Canada is not just a neighbor. It is source of energy security. That changes the power equation. Yes, the United States is the bigger market. But Canada is not without leverage. Canada has oil, gas, uranium, potash, critical minerals, geography, stability, And now, increasingly, options. That is why the old bullying model is starting to fail. Trump seems to think pressure always produces submission. But in this case, pressure is producing diversification. Pressure is producing hedging. Pressure is producing middle power coordination. Pressure is producing the slow strategic decoupling of trust. And Hoekstra's public complaints reveal how little Washington seems to understand that. Because instead of announcing progress, he is talking about headwinds. Instead of presenting a roadmap, he is effectively admitting the talks are stalled. Instead of reassuring markets, he is confirming uncertainty. That is not diplomacy from a position of confidence. It is diplomacy from a position of frustration. Meanwhile, Carney is not facing a collapse at home. Reuters reported on March 11 that Carney moved to the brink of a parliamentary majority after another opposition MP defected to the Liberals. Reuters noted that a majority would strengthen his ability to respond to Trump's trade measures. That matters because it means he has more political room to stay firm, not less. So where does that leave us? Not with a dead agreement, but with something more unstable in the short term. A living agreement entering its most important review under conditions of deep mistrust. That may be even more dangerous. Because legal death is one thing. Permanent uncertainty is another. And uncertainty can do its own kind of damage. Businesses delay investment. Supply chains get rethought. Partnerships get diversified. Political assumptions shift. And one day everyone wakes up and realizes the structure is still technically alive, but the confidence that once held it together is gone. That is the road CUSMA is now on. Trump still seems to think intimidation is negotiation. Carney increasingly seems to think negotiation with this White House must be backed by alternatives. Mexico wants access, stability, and protection from arbitrary shocks. And the industries that depend on this framework are watching the whole thing with growing alarm. So if you want the cleanest version of the truth, here it is. CUSMA is not dead. But Trump is absolutely sabotaging the trust required to keep it alive in anything like its current form. And Carney has not shut every door. However, he is very clearly building a future in which Canada is less willing to let its economic survival depend on the whims of one man in Washington. That is the real story. Not a dramatic collapse in one afternoon. A strategic fracture in slow motion. And if July arrives without real seriousness from Washington, then the question will no longer be whether Trump destabilized the talks. The question will be whether North America just watched one of the most important trade frameworks in modern history drift from continuity into permanent instability, because Donald Trump mistook intimidation for statecraft.